Welcome to the Excruciating Minutiae Podcast, where we obsess about sports, pop culture, and politics, but mostly sports. Here are your hosts, Randy and Steven.
Hello again, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Excruciating Minutia. I'm Randy, and I'll be joined shortly by Steven. But before we begin, I'd like to ask if you please check us out at excruciatingpodcast.com for all the links to your favorite places to listen to our episodes on a regular basis, or check us out at excruciatingpod at Twitter. Steven, today we'll be looking at the year 1989. This will be our fifth and final chapter in our look back at that momentous year in our lives and our history 30 years ago. And today it's going to be mainly technology based. We're going to be looking at that, and we'll also be looking at some of the notable people born that year and some of the notable people who left us in that year 30 years ago. Like I said, we've talked about a lot in 1989. Technology, it was really a number of things, but the big thing, and it's the reason we're kind of here today, isn't it?
It is. In 1989, what we know as the modern internet was invented by Al Gore.
Yes. If you ask him.
Not by Al Gore, but by Sir Tim Berners-Lee, who invented what we now know as the modern internet. He invented what is called HTML, which is hypertext markup language, which is the language of the internet. And he invented URLs, which is basically what you see in the address bar on any browser. And that's kind of what allowed everyone to connect to different places. And you think about the days before the internet and cell phones as part of that. But the cell phone is like our easiest way to get to the internet now because we always have it on us. But, you know, think about our lives before the internet. We talk a lot about our fantasy baseball, right? And, before the internet, fantasy baseball was something you would have to literally do by hand.
I did that.
Right. So we now, when we're watching fantasy baseball, we're literally watching the standings change in real time. Every pitch that's thrown, every hit, every out, it's affecting our standings. That's not the way it used to be. I mean, in theory it did, but we had no way of accessing that. So you would either pay a stat service to compile your stats for you, which the first league I was in, that's what we did. And you would get the weekly stats and standings physically mailed to you with a stamp. I don't know if anyone knows what a stamp looks like these days because no one uses them anymore. But that's how you got the standings. So the standings were up until the week was Monday to Sunday, and you wouldn't get those standings for that week until usually I would get them Thursday, Friday, most of the time, to find out what happened almost 10 days earlier. I mean, you could kind of figure it out yourself through box scores, but you weren't doing everybody's. And you talk about the fact that when you were running the league that we're in now, which at the time was a much smaller league back in the early 90s, 5 or 6 teams, what did you have to go through to actually do the standings?
I actually had pen and paper. I had everyone's rosters written down on said pen and paper. I had a notebook devoted to it. People would have to call me with the roster moves that they wanted to make and leave them on sometimes an answering machine. If people want to know what that was, look that up on the internet, because that's something you don't see at this point in time anymore. And they would go ahead and leave their roster moves, and I would go ahead, and USA Today was the stat choice service, if you will, and they would post every team. American League, I think it was, would come out on Tuesdays and the National League on Wednesdays, and I was running an American League only league, and I'd have to look each player up and see what their stats were. And then if you picked the player up, I had a reference sheet that showed what their stats were when you picked them up, so I could subtract them with a calculator. If anyone needs to know what that is, like a literal handheld calculator, so that way I could backtrack out previous stats before you pick them up. And then once I had all your players down, I would manually add that up by hand with the calculator. And then when I was done with all those teams, then I would see where each team fell in each category and then see what points those were. And then I would either print out some sort of sheet that I would photocopy so I could hand out to the other owners when I would see them or run into them, or if I had to mail them to them. And you're right. It would take a couple days for people to kind of know where they were. And it took me hours to do this. Hours. And, that was the way it was done back then, pre-internet. And it's a lot easier now, right? The internet has made so many things easier now. How many things do we do strictly on the internet? You said the internet was invented. The joke I was going to make was, and then 5 minutes after the internet was invented, internet porn was invented, which now comprises 85% of what we know the internet to be. Is that the way that works now?
It's probably not 85% because I think a lot of the internet now is social media. Basically, at this point, it's social media and porn. That's basically what the internet is.
That's what it has turned into. Yeah. It's what is it? It's Rule 34. You've heard of Rule 34, right?
I haven't. No.
You have not heard of Rule 34?
I don't think so. I'm looking it up right now. Rule 34.
That Rule 34 says that if
it exists, there is porn of it.
No exceptions. Yes. Doesn't matter what it is. Come up with anything and you'll find porn of it. Yep.
Fantasy baseball porn?
Somewheres. Don't Google it because then that's going to be in there.
Hold on. Fantasy baseball porn.
You may not like what you
Adult
find.
Like fantasy baseball camp porn videos on Pornhub.
I'm telling you, there you go. You see?
Baseball team screws slutty fan. No, this is not really.
Well,
there's a baseball bat going where it shouldn't go.
I'm telling you.
That's the first thing. The second thing on the search, fantasy baseball porn. Guess who they mention? Lisa Ann.
She's got a show on Sirius.
That's right.
Was it? It's Lisa Ann. What's it called?
Lisa Ann Knows Fantasy.
Yeah. Yeah, I was in the car with somebody who was not familiar with her body of work, so to speak. And we're listening, and I'm like, do you know who that is? And they're like, I have no idea. I'm like, look at the title of the show. Listen to her voice. Listen to her talk. And just think about it for a second. And think kind of like dirty. And then the look on their face when they realized, oh, that's what this. Yeah, yes, that's a porn star talking fantasy sports, basically. So yeah, I'm amazed you've never heard of Rule 34. That's kind of a thing. Yep. So basically, whatever it is, there's porn of it. So, but not to drag this completely into the gutter because that would be where we'd be going. Let's pull it out for a second. No pun intended. It's changed so many things about the way we do things today. And again, on a serious note, from pornography, when we were kids, what was that? That was trying to watch the scrambled channels on your cable, right? Maybe you had HBO or Showtime and you would stay up late and kind of sneak in, the dirtier R-rated movies that would show up on there late at night, maybe. Or maybe you had somebody who you knew who had a stash of Playboy magazines. That's how you did that. Nowadays, you can Google any celebrity or whatever, and there's literally, right, there's sites devoted to that, right? That's the internet. But when you take it to a different aspect, it's not just that, obviously. I mean, we're joking about the percentage and what the internet is, but if you want to find out anything, how many times have we talked about something on this podcast over all these episodes? And we're trying to figure out, well, I can't remember that actor's name, or I can't remember that film's name, or I want to look up and see, who won the Academy Award that year. And you can Google it or search it. You can go to a Wikipedia or to an IMDb, or you can go anywhere and you can research anything now. I mean, we had encyclopedias when we were kids. That's how you learned, right? Did you have a set of encyclopedias? My parents bought us one when I was a kid. I read the encyclopedia as a kid. Shoot me. That made me kind of, strange, I guess, for my age bracket. But I learned by reading the encyclopedia. Did you have encyclopedias?
No.
I mean, your library, I'm sure did. No, right? The school did.
Yeah, absolutely. And there was, Encyclopedia Britannica. There was a number of different encyclopedias, but
does anyone make those anymore? My guess is no. Or if they do, who buys them? Why would you?
The thing about it is that now kids do research. They don't go. It used to be, they go to the library and like look up things in books, right? And you'd have to learn the Dewey Decimal System and how to work the card file to figure out what it was you were looking for, right? And now you just put in a search word into a browser and everything pops up. I mean, think about law offices. Law offices used to have these huge libraries of books and all these old court cases. Now they just subscribe to Westlaw. It's a website. You can access it from anywhere. You don't need to go to a law library to look anything up.
Look at an old film dealing with a lawyer and how many times you see a scene of, I'll give you a perfect example of one of my favorite movies dealing with like criminal justice and all that, featuring one of my favorite actors. You've seen the movie Presumed Innocent, right? With Harrison Ford. Raul Julia was in that, the late Raul Julia, great role there. Really great cast, Bonnie Bedelia, Greta Scacchi. Brian Denny was in that. And there's a scene, Harrison Ford's character, who's been accused of this crime, is trying to look for precedent to keep something out of the trial, showing up as evidence. And they're showing him poring over law books, looking for something in a previous ruling. Like you said, they wouldn't do that anymore. That's how much it's changed. And we could talk about that in all facets of life. Shopping. How did you do your shopping 30 years ago?
You have to go to the store. It was awful. You'd have to like go and see people and deal with terrible salespeople and
wait a minute. I worked in retail for a number of years.
Exactly. And you go to the store and you didn't know if they had what you were looking for or not. And if they didn't, you'd have to go to the next store. Now you just hop online, and if you want to pick it up in the store, you can. You can actually see what the stock is at the store you're going to. Hey, I want to buy this thing. Do you guys have it in stock, type of thing? And the store closest to you doesn't, but this one that's a little further away actually has it in stock. Or you can just order it and we'll ship it to your home for free.
Yeah.
Think about Amazon. I mean, I think about how much stuff I buy on Amazon. Here's another thing for you. Think about how much time you spend on eBay. eBay doesn't exist without the internet.
God. Oh, no, it doesn't. Yeah. I mean, the internet created eBay. Yes, it did.
And to be honest with you, think about how you used to sell your comics at your comic book store, right? People had to come in to see you. Now you don't have a comic book store, but you're still selling them. You're doing it online.
Yeah. To relate these things individually to me, I bought my first flat screen TV, and you probably helped me along with making a decision on what to go with at the time. You know how I bought my first flat screen TV? I bought it on Thanksgiving night in my boxers and a t-shirt, sitting on my sofa from Best Buy, from their website.
Okay. I thought you were standing in line at the store in your t-shirt and boxers. That would have been a problem.
That could have been an issue. So again, I worked retail in my younger days, and I worked, for our listeners, I actually ran a major toy store chain, which was great for like 8 months of the year. And the other 4 months of the year, it was like the eighth circle of Dante's hell from Dante's Inferno. It was horrible. It was terrible. I'm surprised I didn't see people in their underwear camping out for those great, Green Friday deals, right? I got my Green Friday deal on my TV because Best Buy's website actually had everything running on Thanksgiving. Even though their store wasn't even open, you could buy it on there. And it was the same price for the people that were actually standing in line. And I remember being stunned by that because it's like, I really would like to get this TV. But I'm not going to be able to be in line. Let me go check their website. There it is. There it is. Same price. I can order it. Hey, like you said, free shipping. It was incredible. And to go to the comic book aspect, I've mentioned before, I'm a comic book collector. Back in the day, if you wanted a book, you had to go to a convention or go to your local shop. Or when you traveled the country, you'd check out different shops. And books had a perceived rarity because there were things you just didn't see. So when you'd see it, you'd buy it. And you wouldn't necessarily question sometimes some of the asking prices or even the conditions, because it was like, well, I haven't seen that book. I've been looking for it forever. Now, pretty much not every book. I mean, there's still rarity from the golden age stuff, which is like, 1930s, 1940s into the 1950s stuff. But if it was a major like Marvel or DC book from the 1960s on, I can pretty much find a copy. I just have to go online. And it's not just eBay, because all the dealers, at least the big dealers around the country, they all have websites and they have inventory on those websites. And as you've mentioned, I buy and sell on a message board. Facebook is used as a place to buy and sell things. Facebook is used to interact with people. I mean, that's another big, huge part of our culture today that wouldn't be around. How many people stay in touch with one another through Facebook or through Instagram, right? Back in the day, you want to contact somebody and just kind of share something. People wrote letters and mailed those letters. Nowadays, you post something on someone's Facebook page. Things have changed, all because of the internet. It's amazing. If you didn't grow up without the internet, you can't really appreciate what a change in life it's been to have the internet. Would you agree with that? I mean, like kids today, and boy, that just makes me sound old as hell, but kids today who've grown up with it, they just don't get it because they've always had it. We didn't. We know the difference, right?
Oh, yeah. You were talking about like selling stuff. I kind of dabble in expensive bicycles. And, when I used to have to sell one, you'd have to like post a sign up at the local bike shop. And it was just the people that went into that bike shop that would see that. But there's a huge market for this type of thing, but it's not necessarily in the town you're in. So you put an ad on eBay. I mean, I bought and sold maybe 10 different bikes over the last few years. It's simple. It's just you put it up there, you have a bid, you typically get a lot more money than you would get locally. You put it in a box, you ship it, and you're done. I'm able to find things that I was never able to find. I mean, think about all the specialty things that are out there now that were never available, unless you had a local vendor nearby that would sell something like that. But a lot of times with some of this niche stuff, there might only be one or two vendors nationwide, right? And if they're not near you, you're never going to see that.
Absolutely.
Think about things like Uber and Uber Eats and Grubhub and all those things where you can like hop online and order food from any restaurant and it's delivered to your house.
I eat pizza from time to time. I'll order a pizza. I don't have to even get on the phone. I just, like you said, I hop on the computer. I build my pizza on the computer. I order it. And it even pops up a window that tells me, when it's coming. And there's like a tracker in the oven, boxing, on its way. It's like something that would have been unheard of 30 years ago. It's just amazing. The change in life, I'd say it's all for the better, for the most, not all of it. There's always a little bit of negativity when it comes to certain things that are on the internet, obviously, in different circles and different things that are not necessarily positive. But by and large, the huge amount of change that has occurred in your life and my life and the lives of people in general brought on by the internet has been positive. It's made our lives easier, more fulfilling, allows us to do more than we ever did before. So,
well, the one thing that I will say, working in an education environment and dealing with kids who have literally lived this way their whole life, is they spend all their time on the internet, mostly on their phones, and they're texting and they're Instagramming and they're doing all this. And there's a lack of building of interpersonal skills that used to come from having to go places and interact with people. You don't have to anymore. So when they're forced to, they're really bad at it. And that is one of the negatives of the internet, and the convenience will come at a price. I believe one of the reasons that our world has gotten so fractured politically is because of the internet. Because people don't talk out issues. They just rant at each other online. They don't interact with other people. They just go to places they want to go. The other thing that the internet has given rise to is a lot of racism. And think about the Ku Klux Klan. What the Ku Klux Klan used to be was it was local. And if you didn't have a local branch, or if you didn't know somebody locally, you couldn't really be part of that, white supremacy group. Now it's all online. You can be anywhere. I could just go and, look them up, and you're on their website, and they have a platform now. I mean, everyone has a platform. Heck, you and I have a platform now, right?
We talked about it during our conspiracy episode, where we referenced the fact that, like, the flat earth people who, we think are, might be nice enough people in real life, but have this insane belief that the earth is flat, that there's probably a website and there's a way you can join it. And how many people do you personally know think the earth is flat? Well, might be zero, but if you can get on the internet, you can now interact with other people who might think it is as well. And as crazy as that would be, and that kind of fits in, like you were saying, it doesn't matter how out of touch or, off the wall or crazy or bizarre or, sickening or whatever it is. We're not even going to talk about the dark web, which we don't want to get into because, there's a lot of stuff out there that's really, really bad, right? And you can find that on the internet if you look hard enough. We don't want to look. I don't want anybody to look, but that is some of the bad things. And he mentioned like the political discourse or, the way things are, and whether it's not just this country or other countries or just in general, like it's fair to say that you and I do not 100% across the board agree with everything politically. Would you say that's a fair statement? Not 100%. We have a lot of beliefs, I think, that are in common. We have a number of beliefs where we differ. But here's the difference. You and I, whenever we talk about those things, we talk about them in person. We have an intellectual discussion. We remember at the end of the day, we know who each other are. We know who we're talking to. We don't make it personal. We try to deal just in whatever facts we can. We both have our own opinions. We have an intellectual discourse and an exchange of ideas, which at the end of the day, whether or not we come to a differing opinion, we at least at the end of the day probably respect each other's opinions more because we're having that discussion. Whereas, like you said, the anonymity of the internet, you get on a message board somewheres, there's no context, there's no tone, there's no ability to know if, are you dealing with somebody who's being sarcastic? Are they serious?
Are they trolling you?
Are they trolling you? And then you don't know who these people are. You might take a quote somebody says, or somebody might make a comment on something. And, then all of a sudden, you're a terrible person. You're homophobic. You're racist. You're a nut job. You're whatever it is. You come across this, you don't really know that person. You really don't. And you can't really necessarily gauge their intent. And that is a bad part of, I guess, what the internet's brought to everything is that anonymity. You're right. What have we said 1,000 times before? It's that people will say things on a message board under the guise of some screen name that they would never say to somebody else to their face if they were in front of somebody, right? That's what the internet gives you sometimes. It gives you that freedom to act in ways that you wouldn't act normally. And sometimes those ways aren't the best. I think we can agree on that. That's not a good thing, but it is something you get the bad along with the good with anything, I guess, unfortunately. Yep. You'd say that's the case, wouldn't you?
Yeah, there's positives, there's negatives. I mean, there are plenty of people who have found love or partners through dating sites, through eHarmony or whatever. And without the internet, that doesn't happen, right? You wouldn't have had access to meet people from outside your circle of people or your area.
Your friend of a friend of a friend, right?
Right.
Let me introduce you to her. She's got a great personality. Correct. And she's been single and she has 20 cats. You have 20 dogs. You'll make a perfect couple. Yeah, that you're right. That's yet another thing. Online dating, which obviously is a thing. You get people, they say they're too busy. They don't have time to weed through all that. How did you meet people back, before way back when you're young and single? How'd you meet people? You met them either through work, right? Maybe through school. Occasionally a friend might introduce you to somebody and try to set you up. Or you met them in like bars or nightclubs.
Or parties. Right? Yeah, parties.
Or parties, yeah. That was the main way you did. And you got people today, it's like, I'm too busy for all that. I can't go hang around a bar. I don't have time to bar hop looking for Mr. Right or Mrs. Right. but I can go, like you said, on Match.com or eHarmony or whatever, those ones that run those commercials or used to run those commercials, right?
FarmersOnly.com.
Got to be a farmer.
Yes, they have Farmers Only. They have a different one I see all the time now, and I don't know if I'd notice it because I'm now that group. It's called Our Time, which is dating site for 50 and over.
Oh, geez. Well, then, there you go.
I don't want 50 and over.
Just because you're 50 and older doesn't mean you're looking for 50 and older. Come on now. Christian Mingle was another one, very specific, right? You're looking for a certain type of person. Well, there you go. So
Tinder, Grindr, I mean, they have all of them.
From what I've heard, because I've never been on Tinder, but Tinder is not exactly for like just dating, is it? That's not really, I don't think it's main intent, is it? Am I being pessimistic there? Then thinking
they claim, as I look them up on the internet, that it's for whether you're looking for a hookup or an LTR, which is a long-term relationship. So, but you've got all of them. You've got OkCupid, you got Match. There's one called Bumble, Plenty of Fish. Who the hell heard of all these things? So, but whatever.
You've been out of the game for a while. Let's be honest.
I'm way out of the game. The game has passed me by, I believe is the term.
I think that's a fair statement for both of us there.
Yeah, exactly. So that's all this stuff that's come from the internet. We're just touching on it. Our podcast is a perfect example of what the internet makes possible. We're 1,250 miles away from each other, having this conversation over the internet, taping it on the internet, and I'll edit it and then upload it to the internet, and it will go to our website, it'll go to Twitter, it'll go to Facebook, it goes everywhere. I go to another site, put in all the information, boom, it launches out everywhere. All that is made possible by the internet. If we didn't have the internet, this podcast wouldn't how else would somebody find your podcast?
It wouldn't be able to. Yeah.
Right. Without the internet, there's no Netflix.
Oh, God.
There's no streaming audio. You lose track of what it is, that how much of things are touched by the internet.
I was watching yesterday in the morning a movie, Lost in America. Albert Brooks, Julie Haggerty. You ever seen that?
I don't think I did.
It's a pretty good movie. It's about a couple who decides to drop out of society with this huge nest egg, and Julie Haggerty loses it all in a casino in Las Vegas. And that kind of throws a little monkey wrench into the plans there. But you've seen Albert Brooks before, so it's his brand of humor. It's a pretty good movie. It's a movie, I think, from like the 80s or whatever. I was just going through, I think it was Cinemax online, like Max Go is what it's called. I was looking through different movies, and there's there's movies that are relatively new, things I missed in the theater. And I came across that. I'm like, I haven't seen that in ages. And there it is right there for me to watch on demand. And I actually watched the movie again because I remember seeing it way, way back when it was on cable and enjoying it. I'm like, I haven't seen this in forever. I got a couple hours to kill. I'm doing some other stuff and put it on and enjoyed it. You couldn't do that without the internet. Like you said, the streaming between Netflix and Hulu and Amazon Prime and YouTube has their own stuff now. And all the pay channels, HBO, Showtime, Cinemax, they all have online stuff, right? Pretty much you can see almost anything. If you're willing to pay a little bit of money, almost everything's available to stream at any given point. So if I told you, Steven, here's a movie, go watch it. If you have the time, you're either going to find it free somewheres or you'll find it for a small amount of money. And you can do that. 30 years ago, what were we doing? We were maybe going to the video store. 89? Yeah, video stores were a thing.
Yeah, video stores were around since the 70s.
Yeah, but they really, really had taken off. I want to say like
in the 80s.
In the 80s into the early 90s. So you wanted to watch a movie, you'd go to Blockbuster and you'd rent a movie, and you were hoping that the new release, that they had enough copies of it that you could actually get one, and that it wasn't sold out and you didn't have to wait for somebody to return the copy. And, and if the movie you wanted wasn't there, then you went searching through the old movies. And occasionally, you'd find a movie. I haven't seen that before, but you were limited to what you could find, whatever the video store actually stocked on hand. That's not the case anymore. There's pretty much anything you want to see is out there somewhere. So you just got to look to find it. And like I said, have a little bit of money to pay for it, but it's also cheaper because brand new movies are a little pricier, but older stuff, even if you have to pay for it, usually it's only a handful of bucks from, let's say, Amazon or something like that. It's unbelievable. That, again, just one more facet of our life that has changed. And you mentioned the streaming. It changes the way people watch television because now you don't necessarily need TV or cable or anything like that. You can get away with just streaming services. Changes the way you go to the movies. You don't have to go to the theater. You can watch it at home. I don't know about you, but it certainly is a lot different for me on my end, convenience-wise, than it was 30 years ago.
Well, there's a couple of things that you mentioned there that I just wanted to touch on. YouTube. There's another example of without the internet, there is no YouTube. So how much time do you spend? You constantly are sending me, and me the same to you, like sending you things that we find on YouTube. I'm telling you, that's where kids live. Kids live on YouTube. They literally do. They don't understand the idea that you go to a television that is in a fixed location in your house and you have to like turn it on at a specific time to watch what you want to watch. I think NBC coined the term appointment TV, where it was like there was a show that was on that everybody was like, oh, I gotta be there. I gotta watch it. For me, I'm going to say this out loud and I'm going to own it. It was Melrose Place. Monday nights on Fox. At the time, I was bartending. I bartended on Monday nights, and we did Melrose Place watching. Okay, so nice. When that show came on, the jukebox went off, the volume went on, and everybody in the bar was watching Melrose. But that doesn't happen now. Kids, they watch things on their own schedule. And so that's completely different. Think about how different your gaming experience would be without the internet. Now all these internet games are played across the internet. You could be playing with people from all over the world at the same time in the same game, right?
On top of that, I've told you, and you found that astounding that people watch this, and I'm going to admit that my guilty pleasure is I do watch people that stream video games. There are people who are literally video game streamers, and that's all they do. That's now a profession that they make money because they have millions of people who are subscribed to their YouTube channels, or there are people that do it on Twitch. And I've told you, I've seen, like a live stream on Twitch where somebody had like 70,000 people watching them. That would fill up a major sports stadium. It's unbelievable. And they're basically playing video games. And like you said, you wanted to play a video game with your friend. And you mentioned here, by the way, released in 1989, Tecmo Bowl for the NES, which was the first console game that actually featured real NFL players. If you wanted to play Tecmo Bowl, what'd you need? Well, you needed a friend. That helped. You needed an NES. You needed a copy of Tecmo Bowl. You needed an extra controller, and you'd figure out whose house you were going to play at, and that's where you played together in the same room. I was watching a Twitch streamer the other day who puts videos on YouTube playing a game called Apex Legends, which is a new like battle royale game that's out. And he's playing with a guy. He lives in Canada. He was playing with a guy who lives in Minnesota. He was playing with another guy. They were playing a squad of 4. A third guy lives in Georgia, I believe it is. And the fourth guy lives in England. And they're playing together on a team. You couldn't do that 30 years ago. That's commonplace now. That's amazing. That's, again, just astounding. And going to video games, something else you had. Did you have a Game Boy at all in your lifetime?
I never had a Game Boy. Nope.
Introduced in 1989 was the Nintendo Game Boy. Not necessarily, I think, the first handheld system. It may not have been the first portable system.
No, it was. That's why I had it on there. It was the first handheld system. I mean, before that, do you remember the old Mattel, like, football game?
Oh, yeah. We used to play that at lunchtime at school. Absolutely. Yeah.
Right. I mean, that's what a handheld game looked like for us. And it was literally a little LED blip that moved, forward. If you had the first generation, you could only move forward. The second generation, you could actually move backwards and you could pass, if I'm not mistaken. The first one, you couldn't even do any of that.
High tech.
Yeah, that was high tech. You could actually pass or go backwards. But the Game Boy was the first handheld gaming system that the world had ever seen.
That I did not know. I wasn't sure if it was the first. I knew it was the most popular and certainly was the most successful of all the handhelds. It was copied, but apparently, I believe the estimates are that it sold close to 120 million units worldwide, along with its successor, the Game Boy Color. The Game Boy was, it revolutionized gaming in a number of ways, because you can't take your console. You couldn't take your regular Nintendo to play Tecmo Bowl in the car. Boy, the Game Boy was I imagine, a gift to a lot of parents on cross-country car trips, right? To keep their kids entertained in the back seat. Nintendo made a lot of money off of that. Did they not? I'm guessing.
Yeah, they did.
Moving on, tell us, there were some other technology things launched that we take for granted today, but were newer then. And wow, looking at some of the price tags on these items. Holy crap.
Well, we'll get to some of the real expensive stuff in a little bit. First, when we're talking about computers, the architecture of a computer has not really changed that much over the last 30 years. There was a huge advancement of what was called at the time a 486 processor. That's basically the same architecture as today. Now, obviously, the chipsets and everything is so much faster, much more powerful. But the way a computer was basically built, configured back then, starting in 1989 when they redesigned it, it's been the same since. You could buy a home computer at the time for about $400. The Commodore 128 was available in 1989 for $400. You couldn't access the internet at that time. You have to go a few years after the invention of the internet before you get to what we all remember, those of us who were around in the early to mid 90s, which was you saw literally thousands of those AOL discs that came everywhere, those CD-ROMs for AOL to install it on your computer. That came a few years later. Right. Oh, God. Yeah. I'm sure we'll address that at some point, but that was much later. That was probably about 5 or 6 years after that. That was more towards the early to mid 90s. One of the other things that was launched in 1989 was Microsoft Office. So you're talking about how you had to hand tabulate all of the stats. With Microsoft Office, you could put everything in Excel and it would add it up. It would sum all the totals for you. It could do all that stuff for you. But of course, you needed a computer, and who of us actually had computers in 1989? Macintosh actually came out with the first, what they called a laptop. It was the Macintosh Portable for the mind-numbing price of $6,500. They called it portable. It was what I called luggable, which was, it weighed about 20 pounds.
I'm looking at a picture of it. That thing's a beast.
Yeah, it was big. God. It was big. It was the first Apple that was battery powered. Didn't last for very long. It did not have a trackpad, but it had a built-in trackball. As I see, the introductory price was $7,300, although you could get it for about $6,500.
I noticed the 2018 equivalent of that is over $14,000.
Yeah.
Oh my God. Yeah, not everybody was walking around, or in this case, as you said, lugging around one of those things. Jeez.
It was not a color screen. It was a monochrome screen. It was designed to deliver high performance at the cost of price and weight. You just bought a laptop a couple of months ago. How much did that laptop cost you?
Well, you saw the laptop.
I did.
I think your comment was, wow, that's a really big screen, right? Apparently, I got a big screen here. I got a laptop that was not quite the top end, but it wasn't a low end. So it was like a good solid mid end to high mid end, 600 and something. I guess it was. slightly less than 17 grand.
And you can buy a pretty decent entry-level computer nowadays for
Half that, huh?
$350 to $400.
Yeah.
Really, really solid computer. And this thing was $6,500.
For $6,500, I can get a top of the line gaming, streaming, whatever video type computer and a bunch of accessories. If I want to spend $6,500, I can really get top of the line. That would blow that portable thing, right out the water. But we talked about the phone, right? The mobile phone,
Yes,
the Motorola. Yeah, I mean, what did you say price on that was?
$3,000 for the Motorola MicroTac, which was, if you remember the beginnings of cell phones, they were enormous. I always tell people to go back and watch the movie Wall Street. And at one point, Gordon Gekko, Michael Douglas, has a phone in his hand. It looks like an oversized brick. And it probably weighed about that much. And he has it up to his ear and he's talking in it. And it's so funny because it's like we think about our phones now, which are so thin and small. And that thing was enormous. Well, the MicroTac was the first of kind of the smaller phones. And it actually had a bottom piece, was like a cover that went over the buttons. And then you'd flip it open and that's what you would talk into.
High-tech flip phone.
It was really the first flip phone, but it was, compared to what we have now, it was huge. But for then, it was like really small. Like I said, it was $3,000. And God knows what the service cost. I mean, that was back in the day when you actually had to pay for minutes. Remember the first time you had a cell phone, you'd have like a 400-minute package, right?
Yeah, you paid for text messages too.
Right,
and,
right.
Yeah, these things weren't free. Yeah,
right.
Never mind the date. Like I said, back then, these phones, no internet. You mentioned before that cell phone pictures with the camera are as good as pretty much what you could take with a regular camera. These cameras have gotten so powerful and so technologically advanced. Well, that thing couldn't take any pictures. I mean, really couldn't do much with that phone other than call somebody. You were calling them on a landline because they probably didn't. Well, maybe you were calling them on another brick-sized or slightly smaller $3,000 phone. Because I guess if you own that, the people that you hang around with might have enough money to afford a similar device. I'm guessing, maybe.
Yep.
Other stuff, computer-wise, something very important. Especially, you mentioned on a previous podcast that you might be traveling. Now, this might not come in handy for what you'll be doing, or maybe it will. What's that? I see was launched in 1989. Kind of big.
Yeah, your first GPS satellite was launched. And think about it. Nowadays, it's hard to buy a car now that doesn't have, GPS installed. Your smartphone has GPS. Even before that, you could buy the little GPS, the Magellan. Garmin made them, the little GPS that would mount in your car.
Yeah.
So, before that, you'd actually have to have a paper map to figure out where you were. And, God forbid you had a map that was not up to date.
See, we remember that. We remember the paper map. We remember stopping, on a trip with our parents, driving somewhere, trying to figure out where the hell to go. And someone, let's take a look at the map, right? That's a thing for us. That doesn't happen anymore. And that's because of technology. That's because of the internet. That's because of things like the GPS satellite. I mean, that had to have happened to you at some point on a family trip, right? The map was brought out. That's like a cliche, right?
Yep.
We saw that. What was it? National Lampoon's Vacation. I'm sure they referenced a map at some point in that as they got lost. That doesn't happen anymore because, as you said, everybody's got GPS. So just type in where you want to go and the car will tell you where to go, essentially, or your phone in some cases.
Yep.
That's huge. It's amazing.
Yeah, there was a lot of technological breakthroughs in 1989, and it really has changed our life. And a lot of these things that happened 30 years ago still have huge effects on our lives today.
We just talked about a bunch of things that we could live without them because, like I said, you and I have lived without them, but we wouldn't want to live without them, right? Would you want to go without the internet? I mean, when the internet goes down, how do you feel now? Like if you're at home and for some reason internet's out, what happens? Are you like me? I'm paralyzed.
Yeah. You feel like you're lost almost. It's become, I think in many ways, we're all kind of addicted to it. It's kind of the same feeling that when something is taken away from you that you're so dependent on, and you're like, now what do? I need to do this thing and I can't. It's a really amazing. I'm in the IT field, and God forbid when internet goes down in one of my buildings. We had an outage about a month ago where one of our fibers actually got damaged. And so the building was did not have internet for almost 36 hours while we got the fiber repaired. And God, it was like there's so many things they just couldn't do because nobody there knew how to do it the old way. It wasn't even that they didn't know how to do it. They didn't have the protocols and the stuff they needed to do what they used to do. It was like everything was so internet based. Even the phones now are internet based. Most phone systems in major buildings are IP phones. So they're actually going through your internet and through your local network. And so when your local network or the internet goes down, you may have a phone outage. Everything is kind of intertwined and everything is so connected, and we're so dependent on technology. And now we're starting to see how far do we push it, right? We've had issues with a couple of airliners where the autopilot kind of caused the plane to crash. We've had issues where, these self-driving cars have crashed, which, let's be honest. Yeah, self-driving cars are going to crash. Probably at a much lower rate than, the idiot 18-year-old kid who's texting on their phone.
Yep. Ran into them this weekend that passed.
Yeah, my wife was just telling me a hilarious story about her school. So kids are taking a bus to go to a track meet, right? And one of the students is following behind the bus because she wants to go see the track meet, right? So she's following the bus, except she's texting. The bus stops and she doesn't. She goes right into the back of the bus. And now, because there was an accident and there are kids involved, everyone has to stay where they are. The cops have to come. They have to go through the whole process. It took like 2.5 hours. Needless to say, they had to forfeit the track meet because the kids never got to the track meet.
Wow. Sometimes a little too much technology can be a bad thing as well. It's like everything else. You got to use it responsibly.
And that's what I deal with, a lot of times working in the school system is that, we have internet and these kids sometimes come, as much as we filter stuff is going to get through. I mean, obviously, they're not going to get to Pornhub through our school internet. We block that.
You hope.
Right. But there are other sites that have things on it that we're not classifying, or that the internet doesn't necessarily classify the site as pornographic, but there might be something pornographic on it.
Do you block YouTube?
We do in certain grades. Yes.
Okay. I can absolutely 100% attest. There are full movies available on YouTube, not pornographic ones, but there's plenty of things on YouTube with language far, far coarser than anything we're using today. And there's movies that show graphic violence and nudity available on YouTube that you can see. So all of that stuff available. Just was curious if that was a blocked channel or not.
It is for our younger kids, but there are ways that we can actually filter some. We can do what's called safe search. So if they're searching for something, it won't show up because we've turned on safe search. But if they have a link to a specific video, then they're not using a search function. They're just going to that video. That'll go right through. We're dealing with this. And it's sometimes that you get kids that are, 3rd, 4th, 5th grade, and they come across pictures or videos that are just 100% inappropriate for kids that age. And every time that happens, we just look at each other and say, I guess this was a learning experience for them, because that's essentially, let's be honest, we can protect these kids all we want. Eventually, they're going to go out into the real world and all this stuff's going to be out there, so they have to be ready for it. They have to know that it's there. They have to know that it's not really acceptable and understand why. So you hope that you teach them and that they learn, and chances are we tell them because it's bad, then they're probably searching for it more. That's what I did when I was a kid. Yeah. When my mother said no, it was like that was all my mother had to do for me to get me to do anything was to say no, and I would do it.
That's true.
If she had told me not to do my homework, I probably would have done it. She completely had everything backwards. So
Before we wrap up 1989, I just got 2 words for you for that. Rule 34.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
Now that you know that rule, that's a thing. So I think it's fitting we wrap up the year 1989 by talking about some famous people, some who were born, more than that, who died. And we'll talk about a couple of the people who were born from the music end. Taylor Swift is probably the biggest name. Well, I mean, there's a couple other big names on there. Taylor Swift was born in 89. Chris Brown was born in 89. Let's hope, instead of what's the old joke, the doctor slapped you on the way out. Let's hope he didn't punch the doctor on the way out in 1989. Who else we have here, music-wise?
BB Rexa, who's a huge pop star right now. Maybe not something you would be listening to, but she's pretty popular right now. Of the Jonas Brothers, Joe Jonas was born in 1989.
Big Jonas Brother fan.
I'm sure you are. I'm sure. I know you. I know you're a big fan of their whole catalog.
Exactly.
If you're a Harry Potter fan, Daniel Radcliffe was born in 1989.
He's 30?
He'll be 30 this year, yes.
Gee, when did that happen?
Yeah, I know.
How does the guy, I remember they cast him as a kid. He's 30?
Yeah.
God, now that just makes me feel older.
He is 29 years old. He'll be 30 on July 23rd.
Wow.
You know how I looked that up? I looked it up on the internet.
There you go. So, also born in 1989, Dakota Johnson, who's the daughter of Don Johnson and Melanie Griffith, who is in all the 50 Shades movies. And, thanks to the internet, I've seen her naked. There you go. I couldn't have said that 30 years ago. Brie Larson, who was an Oscar winner and currently starring in the biggest grossing movie of the year so far, Captain Marvel, and some big sports names, Cam Newton, James Harden, and the recently retired Rob Gronkowski, all born in 1989.
Hold on a second. Think about that. You're just saying about how Daniel Radcliffe is so young, right?
Yeah.
All right. So he's the same age as Rob Gronkowski, who's turning 30 years old in May and has retired. He's already done a whole career, and he's 29.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, God.
I can literally see you questioning the life decisions and other things when you read statements like that. What's going on here?
Unfortunately, I was not born with his physical attributes and his abilities.
Yeah. No, most of us weren't.
And for all those people who say they think Rob Gronkowski is an idiot, Rob Gronkowski may be one of the smartest guys I've ever heard of. He has not spent a single dollar of football money that he earned. He banked it all, and he has been living off strictly his endorsements since he got into the league. He did not even spend his signing bonus. And you hear about all these athletes who literally live paycheck to paycheck, even though they're making millions of dollars. Rob Gronkowski can retire at 29 and never work another day in his life. And it's not like he's lived like this saintly, sheltered existence. He's out there and doing stuff and having fun and living a great life.
Smart guy, though, like you said.
Right, but he didn't buy a ridiculously large house. He has a house that's nice, but it's kind of a normal house. He's like, I don't need anything more than this. And he's traveling and doing stuff, but he's not wasting money. I mean, obviously, he's not spending a ton of money on clothes. I've seen what he wears. He just wears... He's not a guy who you see with a lot of jewelry on, right? I mean, he's not doing any of that stuff. So for all these players who, claim that they... who is the player from the Knicks? God, he needed another boat. He was Latrell Sprewell. That's what it, right? Yeah. He was holding out because he wanted more money because he needed another boat. Not a boat, another boat.
Yeah.
So
I wonder how Latrell's doing these days, money-wise. I have a feeling not as good as Gronkowski, if I just had to guess.
Yes, exactly.
That's people that came into this world in 89. You have a much longer list of people who left this world in 1989. Some of these, it was sad to see them go. Some of these other ones, not really so sad to see them go. I hate to say that. That sounds terrible, but we talked about it in previous podcasts. I guess this would be, which one of these is not like the other? The Ayatollah Khomeini, Ted Bundy, Bart Giamatti. Which one of those didn't kill a whole bunch of people? Can I go with Giamatti for that one for 500, Alex? So we talked.
He killed Pete Rose's career.
His Hall of Fame chances he did.
Yeah.
There's 3 people we mentioned before, but other people who we didn't talk about in previous podcasts. The biggest name here, to me, the biggest name here, and there's a couple, I'd say it's Lucille Ball. That's as big an icon in American television.
Yeah, I have a couple other from this list, but you go ahead.
I was going to say Lucille Ball died, and that was a huge loss. And like I said, Laurence Olivier, I mean, that's an all-time great legend of the screen and stage. And, that's obviously a big name. Betty Davis. I mean, like I said, these are all big performers. Mel Blanc, who is the voice of so many cartoon characters that we know of over the years. You mentioned here Gilda Radner, who passed away much younger than these other people, unfortunately.
That's the one for me.
Well, you grew up watching Saturday Night Live.
Right.
That's why.
Right. Everyone else was kind of old. She was young and sadly died of cancer at a very young age.
We just lost not that long ago Gene Wilder, didn't we?
We did.
I feel like that was relatively recent. That was 2016. So Gilda Radner's husband was Gene Wilder. I remember Radner she died. What did she die of? She died of ovarian cancer, I believe it was.
Yep.
So you're right. I remember Saturday Night Live, back in its early days, and that was a sad thing to see. Jim Backus, another person we know very well from television, and also did some voiceover work. Salvador Dali, Irving Berlin. Yeah, this is a pretty big name, but it's not all of them. I mean, we had some big sports people. We had some other big political people. I'll let you wrap up because you have a story on one of these.
I do. I'll finish with that. On the sports side, we had Billy Martin, who actually died, if I'm not mistaken, it was on Christmas Day in a DWI accident. Kind of sad, but he had always had problems with alcohol throughout his career. Hall of Famer Lefty Gomez died in 1989. The boxer Sugar Ray Robinson died in 1989.
Arguably the greatest pound for pound boxer, yeah.
Yeah. And arguably one of the greatest pound per pound horses, Secretariat, died in 1989. So 16 years after winning the Triple Crown, he died.
I think that's your greatest horse ever when it comes to horse racing. So I will say that you see some of the people on this list that touched you, or you're like, God, you didn't know them, but it kind of moved you to hear that they passed away. That might be the first time an animal I didn't own passed away, and it was moving when Secretariat passed, because I remember it being a big story on the news.
Did you not see Old Yeller?
I didn't. I can't watch Old Yeller. I have 800 dogs. If I watch that movie, that's like, I can't do that. I can't. I'll never watch that movie. I know the story. I'm not watching it. Even though it's available somewhere on the internet, I'm sure at this very moment. Who else you had on here? Donnie Moore. That was sad. He took his own life, and everybody remembers him because he gave up the homer to. Oh, who was it?
Dave Henderson.
David Henderson from the Red Sox.
Yep.
That when the Angels were close to going to the series. A few other political people, a couple others if you want to mention.
Sure. A few emperors and dictators and stuff like that. Emperor Hirohito of Japan passed away in 1989. He was the emperor of Japan since before World War II. So he was the emperor during World War II, if I'm not mistaken, right?
I believe he was, and not divine as I believe the tradition was that they believed the emperor was at that particular period of time. Because if he was, you don't die, right?
Correct. Ferdinand Marcos passed away in 1989. He was the dictator of the Philippines, probably more famous for his wife Imelda and her shoe collection. And finally, Nicolae Ceausescu, who was the dictator of what is Romania, who died in very spectacular fashion. We talked at an earlier episode about the fall of the Berlin Wall, and obviously Romania being behind that Soviet curtain, so to speak. And he was overthrown in December. and had an interesting conversation as I was doing the research about him. And I'm like, oh, yeah, he was killed. And then I'm looking and I'm like, oh, he was killed on Christmas Day by a firing squad. And I'm reading more about it. And it's like, oh, yeah, that was on live TV. And I remembered that the woman that cuts my hair is actually Romanian, and she's a little younger than I am. So, she would have probably been a teenager when this happened. And she emigrated to this country after this. So I had mentioned to her that I was doing this research, and she goes, oh yeah. She goes, that was a big deal. She goes, I remember the whole family sitting in front of the TV, watching the trial, which happened on Christmas Day. And then on Christmas night, both he and his wife were shot on national TV.
They didn't waste any time there.
They didn't waste any time. And she mentioned, she's like, it was great. We all hated him. It was one of the greatest Christmas presents we ever had, because the whole country celebrated, which is kind of sad and kind of morbid in many ways, but it shows you what kind of place they lived in.
It was their liberation. So, and they had a miserable existence under the communist boot of the Soviet Union. And a hell of a Christmas story, no pun intended. I mean, what do we watch on TV at Christmas? It's a Wonderful Life, A Christmas Story, maybe, a Christmas Vacation. They're watching an execution. That was reality TV before reality TV was a thing right there. That's a... Yeah. That would have been kind of ironic if all the firing squad had Red Ryder BB guns, right? Oh my God. That would have tied everything in perfectly.
Oh my God. It kind of was.
Darren McGavin yelling fire.
No truth to the rumor that his wife put her tongue on the flagpole prior to the shooting. Yes.
Oh God. The last thing he saw before the firing squad shot was the leg lamp. Was that somewhere
while wearing the bunny suit?
Yeah, they could have put him in the bunny suit. That would have been perfect. Oh my God, that's horrible that we're laughing about it. And yet somehow or another, but yet I wasn't a good guy. I don't feel terrible about that.
I feel like this is more programming for our TV channel. You know how there's mashup music where you take two songs and put them together and make one song out of it? If we take two stories, we take a Christmas story and we take the story of Nicolae Ceausescu and put them together and to make a new story out of it.
Is that instead of a Christmas story, it's a Ceausescu story? Is that what it is?
Yes.
It's a Christmas movie, and we could put it on the Hallmark Channel, and it wouldn't look like every other Christmas movie on the Hallmark Channel. It's counter-programming.
Except for him dying at the end.
Well, yeah, that's true. Well, that's more like a Lifetime film then. It's a really bad guy getting killed at the end in revenge. It's like a Lifetime flick then. More stuff. But it's ironic you end with that story, because we kind of started off our look back at 1989. I think the first thing we actually talked about was the fall of the Berlin Wall and the beginning of the end of the communist bloc and the collapse of the Soviet Union. It's kind of ironic and fitting that we end on a note that kind of ties it all back together. And I think that's a good place to wrap it up. That's 1989. So we will have other things to talk about in the upcoming episodes to come. Things to look forward to in no particular order. We'll be doing another episode on movies at some point down the road, as we'll look at our midsummer movies. We'll be looking maybe at some more conspiracy theories. We think we did very well with that first episode, so there's plenty more for us to talk about. We're looking at maybe doing some top 5, top 10 lists, looking maybe at actors or movies in general. And we're going to be doing some other odd and end things that'll hopefully keep you all interested. But in the interim, that's the end of 1989, the end of our look back, and the end of this episode. So until next time, please check us out at excruciatingpodcast.com for all the links for where you'll be able to find us. I'm Randy. Steven, take us out.
Good night, everybody.
Thank you for listening to the Excruciating Minutiae Podcast. Check us out at excruciatingpodcast.com. Please subscribe to our podcast on any of your favorite podcast platforms and follow us on Twitter at excruciatingpod. See you at the next episode.